Alright, welcome back to PsychRockCentral, where psych rock lives on. Today we're going to be going over a more modern psych rock classic, Ween, Quebec, from 2003. Just a brief overview about the band. They're an American rock duo from New Hope, Pennsylvania, formed in the late 1980s. And they generally started with a lot of maniacal noise rock. God, Ween, Satan, The Oneness, The Pod, Pure Guava, and Chocolate and Cheese represented the more free, obtuse, just very fucking weird spirit of the early 90s noise rock scene that was so prevalent in the underground. But they evolved into a more alt-rock band within the 1990s with The Mollusk, and eventually reached a more psychedelic, new agey art rock sound in the early to mid 2000s. But then they quietly broke up and then reunited in the mid 2010s and have since become a live band. But they have not produced a new album, a new studio album at least, since 2007's La Cucaracha. So let's just briefly go over the music, why don't we? It's a lot of callback to psychedelic rock of days past. If you're very astute, you can hear a lot of Jimi Hendrix, Eric Burdon of Animals fame, and Pearl Before Swine, which means that a lot of the music is not only just psychedelic rock, it's a lot of art rock, it's a lot of American psychedelic folk. There's a lot of unique influences that make up the sound of this album. Again, it's musically amorphous. The album doesn't stick to one particular style or genre, but rather flip-flops in between a myriad of different genres throughout its runtime. At one point, it's very blues-heavy, another it's psychedelic, another is art rock, another is more of the alternative rock of the late 90s. There's even some electronic music there. So, it constantly switches up the mood, the atmosphere, and the energy of each individual track, gradually condensing down into a more melancholic alt-rock sound for the finale of the album. My favorite track would be I Don't Want It, which is one of the more melancholic tracks, but it features a very killer guitar solo from Dean Ween in the middle of the track. But unfortunately, I don't really like this record. I listened to it, I wasn't a big fan of it. I'd even go as to say it's not very good at all. Most tracks to me, they just feel like poor rehashes of the psychedelic rock influences. I mentioned Jimi Hendrix, which is very apparent in the beginning of the record, and then it moves towards the Pearls Before Swine sound of the 60s with the folk rock influences, and then ultimately becomes more like neo-psychedelia from the 60s and the 90s with tracks like Among His Tribe and Zoloft. Other tracks that have their own unique identity kind of just fail to add any significant value to those genres. This includes Transdermal Celebration and Captain. Funnily enough, as I was reviewing this and reading my own script, I noticed that Transdermal Celebration and Captain are allusions to 60s rock bands such as the Red Crayola and Captain Beefheart. So, another play on the whole, we're going to become influenced by psychedelic rock but not really move too far past it. And yeah, there were some genuinely fucking bad tracks. Just a generally poor display of electronica music. This includes So Many People in the Neighborhood and The Fuck Jam. Unfortunately, I don't really feel like these are jokes at the listener's expense. They just feel like they're jokes at the band's expense. They just feel like they're making fun of themselves and not in a self-aware way. They just sound bad. They're not good jokes. Overall, I just don't think this feels very original for a psychedelic or alt-rock album released in the mid-2000s. With the added insight and the technology of the previous decades, it doesn't really add that much. It tends to stick to the tradition rather than moving forward with a more daring, adventurous sound. So, closing thoughts. I think it's generally, not always, but generally failed attempt at making new classic psych rock. The music just lacks the originality from a band whose primary specialty was maniacal originality, especially in the early 90s. I think it just sticks to the past too closely to sound original. From someone with a lot of experience with psychedelic rock and alt rock and post rock, a lot of these tracks and ideas were just done better in the past and in the future by just more competent bands at this type of stuff. Even the greatest material, I think, is just generally lackluster. Chocolate Town and I Don't Want It might be my favorite tracks personally, but I just don't think Ween would have used these tracks on their earlier albums. I could see maybe the Mollusk, maybe like some B-sides on Chocolate and Cheese, but the early stuff, no. This is from an entirely different band, and that's not a bad thing. It's just that Ween had more of a sense of building material that was completely nonsensical, like, you know, the Butthole Surfers and Royal Trucks before them. This just doesn't really hit, it doesn't scratch the same itch, doesn't really hit the same niche, and would have likely been shelved if this was recorded in the 90s, personally, I think. So I'm going to go ahead and just give this a 4 out of 10. Not the worst thing I've ever heard, but definitely lackluster, especially for an album released in the 2000s. I just think a lot more could have been done to make it an adventurous sounding album. For most people who've listened to psychedelic rock, I don't think this is like super worth getting into. I think you delve a little bit deeper and you'll find some real gold hidden beneath the surface. But that's going to do it for today. I'm going to plug my own links. There's the personal blog I've been working on, PsychRockCentral.ca, as well as my Rate Your Music profile, which is linked in my YouTube. I hate doing this YouTuber shit. I think it's very fake sounding, but I mean, you gotta promote yourself somehow, I suppose. Anyway, I will catch you Friday. I upload Tuesdays and Fridays if you didn't know. I'll catch you Friday for the next review. Peace.